The other thing I want you to keep in mind are the characters in this story. There's 4 main characters in there. First, we've got a hurt man. We don't know a whole lot about him, but it is presumed that he is just sort of a common Jewish man. Not any kind of royalty or anything special about him other than that he was a Jewish man. And the second character in this is a priest. Now, a priest during Jesus' day would have come from the line of Levi, which is a royal line of priesthood. He would have been trained to do sacrifices in the temple. He would have been extremely knowledgeable of the scriptures and the law. And he was sort of a spiritual leader for them at the time. Then the next character you're going to meet in the story is a Levite. Now, he is also of the royal line of priesthood, but during this time, there was a lot of the Levites that were not serving as priests. They would have other administrative type duties within the temple. They might be in charge of the judicial matters or different things, but he would have also been extremely learned in the scriptures and would have been well versed in that. The fourth person in this story is going to be the Samaritan. Now, if you remember a few weeks ago when we were talking about worship, we talked about the Samaritan people as not exactly the Jewish people's friends. They were not friendly at all. And as a matter of fact, you could say they hated one another to that extreme. But who the Samaritans were started back in 722 BC, so quite a few centuries before Jesus was ever born, this began. And what happened was when the Assyrians attacked the northern kingdom of Israel, then they took a bunch of the Jews off, or the majority of them. A few of the Jews remained, and what they did was they intermarried with these pagans that were worshiping all kinds of bizarre idols and whatnot. So what they happened was they kind of became a mixed breed, half Jewish, half pagan. And they actually, as their scripture, took the first 5 books of our Bible, and that was their scriptural text. They stopped at Deuteronomy. They didn't have any of the prophets or any of the other books in there. And they also worshiped their graven idols, so they kind of did a little bit of both. And through the centuries, they battled with the Jews over all kinds of theological issues. So by the time Jesus arrived on the scene, it was a very deep-rooted battle. And so much so that Jewish people would not even go in the towns of Samaria. Or if they touched a Samaritan, they would be deemed unclean. So we've got a huge prejudice going on here and a huge divide. But of course, Jesus loves to take people like that and put them in his stories to prove what he wants us to say, what he wants us to know. So let's now turn to this parable, keeping in mind who is our neighbor and how do we love them. According to Jesus, this is his parable, beginning in verse 30. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed on the other side as well. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring an oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. It's important to know here that these 2 silver coins were the equivalent of 2 days' wages, which would have kept this man in an inn for 2 weeks. So it was quite a large sum of money. The next day he took, and they say, "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." You know, I love how Jesus made it so clear that it doesn't matter what race, creed, or nationality you are, we are to extend love to the people God places in the path of our life. You know, and part of the beauty of this whole parable is the reversal of roles. You know, the priest and the Levite were supposed to be the good guys in this story. They were supposed to help this poor Jewish man. But in turn, the Samaritan, who was supposed to be the bad guy, knew Christ's divine law of love. He knew it. And he helped this hurt man, even though he was a hated enemy of his race. So answer to our first question, Christ makes it clear. Who is our neighbor? And this is point number 1. Jesus teaches us in this parable that anyone God places in the path of our life is our neighbor. Jesus teaches us in this parable that anyone God places on the path of our life is our neighbor. So as we're thinking about that definition, all these different people that God places in our life, I came up with 4 different groups of people that you're going to have in your life that God is going to place there for various reasons. The first group is your family. Everybody's familiar with that. That's probably who's the closest to you. That'd be the people that you live with, the people you were born into this family, you have blood ties with them. That would be the first group of people that God puts in the path of your life. Then moving out from there, he gives us friends. That's our next group of people. You may be thinking of people you're categorizing here. And these are the people not related to you, but are close to you. These are the ones that you share personal information back and forth, and you spend significant amounts of time with them, one-on-one, sharing your life with them. You may have a lot of interests in common activities. Those would be what we call our friends group. Then moving out from that group, we'd have what we call our acquaintances. Acquaintances. These are the people that you know by name. You may see them at work. You may see them at church, your children's activities, your own leisure activities in your neighborhood. You know a little bit about them, but you don't spend that significant one-on-one time with them. And usually your conversation is quite surface. It doesn't go down to emotions, feelings, problems, much more surface. And each of these groups get significantly larger as you're moving away from yourself. And then the fourth group, which the Good Samaritan would fit into, is what we call the chance encounters. Chance encounters. These are the people that you may not ever know their name, or you may. You may only see them once in your life, or maybe a few times, but God places them in your life on a temporary basis for a certain purpose in your life. We call those chance encounters. But God has a reason for all these people being placed on the path of our life. The reasons are very different, but he wants us to love them all. And that's point number 3. Many of our specific acts of love will be different for each group, but Jesus wants us to love them all. Many of our specific acts of love will be different for each group, but Jesus wants us to love them all. And in future sessions, like I said, we will be talking more about some specifics that we would be doing for certain groups of people in our life. But this week, we're just looking at the bottom line. How can we love them all? No matter which of those 4 groups, whether it's our chance encounters or our family, how can we love all of them? What are some things we can do to all 4 groups? And that's our next question. How should we express love to our neighbors? First, let's kind of establish that Jesus probably is not calling us in this day and time as women alone to go on dark roads and pick up men on the side of the road that are hurt. It's probably not what he's telling us, so please don't think literally that he's telling us to do that. That just wouldn't be wise. But that doesn't mean we can't call 911 if we see someone hurt or try to get them some help. But I think Jesus is teaching us a much broader concept here with this hurt man, and that is basically just seeing a need and meeting it. You know, when someone's placed in our life, there's a purpose, something we're supposed to do. And Jesus was such a great example of that, where he would see a need, he'd be sensitive. And that's point number 1. Be sensitive to the needs of others. He's telling us in this particular parable. And Matthew 14:14 is just, you can just make note of that. You don't have to turn there. Just a simple example of Jesus being sensitive to the needs of others. Matthew 14:14. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. So it probably wasn't in his day planner to stop and do anything here. But he had compassion. He was sensitive. And the same was true of the Good Samaritan. I'm sure he had his day planned. It wasn't to stop and help somebody along the road. Plus, he had to also realize that he was putting down his hardened prejudice against the Jewish people. He was sensitive to a hurting person. And I think Christ calls us to that, to all the people in our life. The kind of need meeting that he's talking about here is not the kind when you see something on TV that you need to help, starving children in Africa, where that is important. But what he's talking about here is when you have someone placed, a human being in your life that's in need. I think he's crying out for us to be sensitive to that need. Whether somebody needs someone to take them to the doctor, they need a meal, or maybe they just need somebody to talk to. We need to be sensitive to all the people in our lives that have a need. And that kind of need meeting is an example of being a good neighbor and loving after the example of Christ, which is what he's calling us to be.